Hello again, and welcome to Psychoanalytic Theory in a Crazy Nutshell. We're going to do another fairly brief overview. Try to keep it as brief as I can. It's a lot of concepts, but I'll try to keep it as pared down to the basics as I possibly can, stuff that you need to know to really understand psychoanalytic theory. See how I can't even say it. Here we go. Let's go on this wild and crazy ride, shall we? Okay, the big three of psychoanalytic theory. These are the three names that we most commonly associate with psychoanalysis. The most common theorists that we associate with the theory. Freud being the father of psychoanalysis, and then Sigmund Freud, maybe you've heard of him, and then Jacques Lacan and Carl Jung being also part of psychoanalysis, but kind of branching off from his work, agreeing with him on some things, disagreeing on others, and kind of taking things in different directions, but all strange and interesting, and all very preoccupied with trying to figure out what lies beneath the surface, why people do the things that they do, how people form identities, where some of the anxieties that human beings have come from, and what we can do about them. So, that's psychologists. That's what they're all about. And we can apply some of these things to character analysis as well, which is why it can be an interesting endeavor. And if nothing else, then you can practice it on your friends and really weird them out. So let's start with old Freud. All right, Freudian psychoanalysis. As you guys know, we've talked about this a little bit already, and you've done some readings on it. Freud was really, really interested in the concept of the subconscious mind. In fact, he's really the one who, I wouldn't say he invented it. He definitely stole some ideas from others, but or appropriated them, I guess would be the kinder word. But he was the one who really made it a household idea, a common term in the everyday parlance, that the idea of an unconscious or a subconscious, that there are things happening within our minds that we ourselves are not aware of, but they are very, very important nonetheless. And we talked about the three parts of the psyche, and I think, I don't want to hammer you over the head with that anymore, but, we've got the ego, the superego, and the id, and they're all sort of battling for our attention, I guess, if you will, even though we're not really we don't even know we're paying attention to it, but that the anxiety caused by the different drives within us can fuel a lot of interesting and sometimes maladaptive behaviors, if you believe Freud. And the two main drives that Freud said motivate human beings, and a lot of it is subconscious. He said the two main drives that fuel our fires, so to speak, that keep us going and doing the things that we do, all come down to sex, of course, but also aggression. Okay, one he called the life instinct or the libido. The other he called the death instinct, which is where aggression would come into play. He said those are both fundamental parts of the human experience, and a big part of our energy, I guess, and our psyches is spent trying to keep those two drives under wraps, so that we don't, so that we can fit into society, basically. But that can come out in some interesting ways too. Particularly defense mechanisms, and we're going to talk about some of the more interesting defense mechanisms out there that maybe you can see people performing, or characters, more importantly. We are going to talk about the big, icky elephant in the room, psychosexual stages, because they're a really important part of Freudian analysis. Take them as you will, but we're going to just go ahead and get them out of the way. And, we're all adults here. Dreams. Freud was really big on dream analysis, and it's interesting because modern day science is actually uncovering more and more about the importance of dreams and how they work, how they operate, and a lot of it is actually, it certainly doesn't run counter to Freud's ideas. It isn't necessarily the royal road to understanding what makes a person do what he or she does as he thought it did. He thought it was really the language of our subconscious and that we could interpret our dreams to figure out what was really going on. And that's true to some extent. But modern science has certainly revealed that our brains are doing important work while we sleep. Though Freud might disagree on exactly what that work is, it's still important nonetheless. So, moving on. Oh, by the way, the picture in this slide, and I'm going to put the slides up for you guys. The picture in this slide is a link to a video. It's just like a quick 5-6 minute video clip on the basics of Freudian analysis. So if everything I'm saying to you makes no sense, then that can be a good place to check it out. It's pretty basic, pretty summative. Defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms. Okay, so the reason I have a pressure cooker picture here for you guys to see is that, okay, Freud said the mind is like an iceberg, but he also said that it's a lot like a pressure cooker in that we've got a lot going on in there, in that pot that is our psyche. And there's a lot of, I guess, psychic, he would call it, energy being created by that conflict that you guys know about between the three parts of our psyche, and just having to deal with those conflicts. And he said that all of that anxiety, all of that conflict, all of that energy it builds within us, and it's really important that we don't keep too tight a lid on it, okay? So that's where the concept of repression comes into place. Repression is basically a defense mechanism where, okay, if a person is confronted with something that runs counter to what their id wants, desires, whatever, and it runs counter strongly enough, or it really, really offends their superego, or just in some way just completely does not jive, or even is traumatic, like really bad, like traumatic. Freud said that what people will do as a defense is they will take that experience, that memory, and they will put a lid on it. They will stuff it down so deep, so far, that they will essentially, their conscious mind will forget that it ever happened. But Freud would say, you don't forget. It's still there, and it still drives a lot of that behavior, and if you put too tight a lid on it, well, what happens when you put too tight a lid on a pressure cooker and you don't give it any sort of release? Well, it blows up. So Freud said repression is a bad thing. Repressing our drives, repressing our desires, repressing our experiences, in our past, he said those are not healthy things, and they can come out in really unhealthy ways. Projection. Oh, this is one of my favorites. Projection is, okay. Projection happens when if there's something like a negative quality about you, if there's something that you do that you wish you didn't do, I guess, in a way, rather than like admitting that you have this problem, I guess, rather than you admitting that you have this fault and dealing with it that way, you won't recognize that you have this fault, and instead you'll project that fault, that flaw, whatever, onto somebody else, and then you'll criticize them for it. So it's like, in a way, you're kind of dealing with your flaw, but you're doing it in a way that doesn't involve you. So it'd be like, okay, here's an example. Like if you one of your flaws, I guess, was being messy, okay? You're just like not a tidy person, and you were, getting on your roommate's back or your significant other's back or whatever about them being messy, but you don't like admit that, you're the one who has the messiness issue. You're like projecting that flaw onto them, that kind of a thing. So people do that all the time. Now that you know it, you'll see it all the time. Denial, not just a river in Egypt. Some people would lump repression and denial into the same kind of category, but the thing about denial that makes it different than repression is, whereas repression is putting a lid on drives, but it's putting a lid on the stuff that's inside of you, denial is looking at something like right in the face. It's right in front of you. Like it seems like it just couldn't be denied, and still being totally blind to it, right? we've all met people who are in denial. We're probably in denial about some things too, but like it's right there in your face, or in this person's face. It's like right there, and it's like, how can they not see it? It's because they're in denial. It's because they refuse to see it because they don't want to. See what I'm saying? That's another defense. Regression. Okay, so regression happens when you're confronted with something uncomfortable. You're in a situation that makes you uncomfortable, and the way that you deal with it is by sort of retreating back to almost like childhood behaviors. So I'm going to admit that I find myself doing this, and I see it happen when I like get together with my family. Like, you probably know what I'm talking about, unless you see your family all the time. But, you know, like if you don't see your family a lot, you know, if time goes by between hanging out, you got your own life, you got your own thing, you do what you do, and like you've outgrown a lot of your childish behaviors. But then it's like you get back together with your family, you're hanging out with your siblings or whatever, and then all of a sudden it seems like everybody kind of regresses back to their old roles. Like like my brothers and I will totally fight with each other, like things that would normally I wouldn't do or say. Like I don't know. It's like you just kind of shrink back to a kid. Or if something really traumatic happens to a person, they might just, cry for their mommy, something like that. Anyway, that's regression. Reaction formation. Okay. Reaction formation is what people do when they are like, when they have something that they want to avoid, or they have like a drive, they have an impulse towards something, when they have something they want, okay? There's my dog barking. When they have something they want, like, they will like react the total opposite of what they really want to do. So they may like have this drive, this impulse to be a certain way, but they will like go 10 times harder in the other direction, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that would be like somebody who, I guess that's kind of like repression a little bit, but like somebody who maybe is like really has a strong urge to be aggressive and like go out and, I don't know, punch people in the face to really tick them off, but because they're so repulsed by their own drive to do that, they like go way too far in the other direction and they become kind of a doormat, I guess, in a way. Does that make sense? Okay. Reaction formation. Sarcasm is actually a defense mechanism that some people use, and that's coming from a chronically sarcastic person. Sometimes sarcasm can be a defense people use I guess to kind of make light of a situation that really does actually bother them, or to put a humorous spin on something. It's actually, Freud would say it's actually considered a form of passive aggressiveness. Now, we've all seen passive aggression, where there's something that's bothering somebody, but instead of actually talking about or confronting the person that's upsetting them, they will do something else, like, I don't know, leave a note, leave a Post-it note, really nasty Post-it note, or they don't want to actually confront the person about it, but yeah, or when people, you can tell somebody's upset about something and they're like, I don't want to talk about it, never mind, but it's like, okay, well, if you're upset, just say something about it. No, it's fine, whatever, that kind of thing. That's passive aggressiveness. Sublimation. Sublimation is actually the healthy defense mechanism, because we have to use defenses. Like, it's inevitable. We can't always be confronting like what's really going on in there, because there be monsters, so to speak. And so Freud said that's okay. You just have to find healthy ways to sublimate your drives and desires and issues and stuff. So that could be through your work, could be through your artwork, could be through the things that you build, could be, it's when you put that the bad psychic energy, I guess, to work, and you channel it through something positive, I guess. There's a lot of forms that can take. And Freud would say, actually, that storytelling is a form of sublimation, that we use stories, and we love stories, listen to stories as a form of sublimation, because it allows us to confront and deal with issues without actually having to really do it for real, because it's happening to a fictional character. So those are the important defenses. Okay, let's just do this already. The psychosexual stages of development. So one thing you got to hand to Freud, okay, if nothing else, one thing you got to give the guy is that he was really one of the first psychological researchers to focus on the importance of childhood in the formation of our identity. But Freud said, we've all got issues to some degree or another, some way more than others. But he firmly believed that, the first years of our lives were tantamount in forming the adult that we become later. That the things that happen to us during these developmental stages of our childhood never leave us. That they will forever be, I guess, sort of trapped, if you will, within our subconscious. And that can be where these defenses come from. That can be where these, complexes, issues, things like that come from. Okay, so what are the stages? All right. He said the first stage, this is like 0 to 1, is the oral stage. Okay. Basically, it all boils down to like sensitivity, okay, in the child. So he said when a child is born, like they're most physically sensitive in their mouth, which makes sense because, breastfeeding and all that kind of stuff. It just makes sense. Just that's where they've got the most nerve endings. It's a fact. So he said that, children at that age, they go through an oral, I guess, obsession, if you will. They're always putting things in their mouth. That's how they experience the world because their eyesight's not that great yet. So he said that's the stage we go through 0 through 1. Then it goes to the anal stage. He said that, from there we transfer to this stage, and then, our sensitivity changes to a different region. And this is one of those things where it's like, okay, we pass out of it, we go on to another stage. But the thing about these stages that Freud really wanted to emphasize is that if something happens, if things don't go right, things don't go well during these stages of our development, then we can become stuck. We can develop a complex. We can develop what he would call a fixation. So like he said, if something goes wrong during the oral stage, we can end up with an oral fixation. Okay, so he would say that people who like chew their nails, smoke, things like that, that are constantly, they got to have something going on in the mouth region, he'd say those people have oral fixations. And with anal, that's where we get concepts like anal retentive, right? He said that if a child is like, I guess, holding on too tightly, like does not want to let go of, etc., and they don't kind of get over that, then they can become anal retentive, where they, are constantly, clenched, if you will. That goes to phallic. Okay. Phallic, well, I don't need to explain to you where that region of the body would be. Freud didn't really focus much on the ladies, but he said that the phallic stage is an important one, and we'll come back to that in a second, because if something goes wrong during that stage, then that can lead to something particularly troubling, at least according to Freud. But one thing that he said would happen during this stage is that every little boy, right, and I'm not saying this is true, he'd say every little boy would go through this stage and during this stage, it's perfectly natural and healthy and whatever for the boy to have, to desire his mother and to want to get rid of his father, like get his father out of the picture so that he can be with his mother, okay? In that way. So again, take what you will from that, and we'll talk about what can happen if that goes wrong, at least according to Freud. Then kids go into what's known as a latency period, where they're really just like, their brains are developed more, and they're really more, I guess, cerebral, intellectual than they are physical. And latency means there's just really not a whole lot going on. It's latent. It's, it's not a big deal. But he said if you get stuck in this, then you can be, kind of frigid for the rest of your life. So, again, take it for what you will. And then that, if you get through all those stages and everything's cool, then you end up in maturity and, you have a healthy, happy sex life. Which, Freud would say it's important to have. Okay, so back to phallic stage. This is where we get the concept of the Oedipus complex. Ooh. Yeah. You've probably heard of it before. Again, take it for what you will. But Freud said that if the boy doesn't, I guess, get out of that phallic stage where he desires his mother and all that kind of stuff, if he gets stuck there, then he can end up with what's known as an Oedipus complex, where for the rest of his life, he'll unconsciously still want his mom in that way and still resent his father in that way for the rest of his life. And that will come out in, his maybe marrying a woman that's exactly like his mom, that kind of a thing. So maybe having an unhealthily close relationship with his mother or whatever. The reason it's called the Oedipus complex is because he derived that name from the Greek tragedy, Oedipus Rex, who, accidentally killed his father and married his mother by accident and brought a curse on the kingdom. Whoops. So that's the picture you're seeing in there, is that play. There's more to the story than that, but that's the important part, I guess. Okay, so Freud said that this is all the stuff that's going on. It's important to recognize these things and just, deal with them in a healthy way. And he said we can also look to our dreams to figure out, what's really going on. If you have a really bizarre, weird dream, that might be some kind of, or something that makes you rather uncomfortable, which we all do from time to time. He said that that's your subconscious kind of playing out these fantasies, I guess, issues, whatever, because you can't really deal with them in your conscious mind. So, Lacan is a confusing guy in a way, but he had some interesting theories. He was also really interested in the concept of identity formation and also in the role that childhood can play in that. Lacan said that, kind of like the way Freud did, that when children are born, they are basically, they're just sort of clouds. They're a cloud of, they just don't have their minds are clouds. They're not really fully formed, developed. They've got really no sense of identity yet. They don't even know what an identity is. They really can't differentiate between themselves and everything around them. They just don't, they can't do it yet because they don't know what anything is and they don't know what they are. And it also makes sense too because, we all begin life really as part of someone else physically in the womb, and so it's a pretty big shift. And so children will actually think that they are part of their mother for a while until they reach what Lacan called the mirror stage. In the mirror stage, he said this is when, and it happens around 2. He said this is when a child realizes that he or she is like a separate entity, that they are not part of everything else. It's when they see themselves basically for the first time. So that's why it's called the mirror stage. In fact, it might even happen with a child looking in the mirror, because when babies are really young, when they look in the mirror, they don't know it's them. They might think it's another baby. They might not think anything about it at all. But that moment when a child looks in the mirror and realizes, hey, that's me, looking back at myself, he called that the mirror stage. And he said that's a huge part of identity formation. And that's when we start to see everything else as separate from us, including our mothers. Right? We start to label those things like the other. Those things, I'm me because I'm not those other things that are all around me. So. He also said that, I guess, reality, or at least the human concept of reality, because Lacan had trouble with things like reality. He said that there's the imaginary, right? That's one of the orders, I guess, of reality within us. Kind of like Freud. Freud had the 3 parts of the psyche. Lacan had the 3 orders. He said the imaginary part of our psyche, I guess, if you will, is our identity. He said that it takes imagination to be able to conceive of your own identity, and the fact that you really can't see yourself objectively at any given time. I mean, you can only see what you see in the mirror, or what you look down and see. You can only see yourself in parts, basically. Okay. He said that we use the imaginary part of our psyche to put all those parts together to create who we are, without actually having to be able to see it. Also, he said things like the rules that we follow, concepts like society in general, culture, things like that. He said that those were all part of the imaginary, They still dictate a big part of our identity, a big part of our ego formation and who we are, but they don't really exist, you would say, in like a physical way. So they're kind of all lumped into that category. The symbolic. One thing Lacan got right, if nothing else, is that human beings are like highly symbolic creatures. I mean, that's one of the things that makes humans and animals different. Now, some animals do kind of in a way use symbols and language, but human beings more so than any other animal by yards and miles. In fact, Lacan would say that it's kind of impossible to have a thought without the language to code that thought. That we think in language, and without the language we can't really think, if you see what I'm saying. So he said also the symbolic and the imaginary are closely tied together because we need language to code the imaginary. So for example, if I used the language code for a concept, if I said the word tree to you, tree, you're probably imagining a tree right now. You really can't help it. You're imagining it. It's not real. It's all in your head, but I'm using symbolic language coding to put that image into your head. So, yeah, he was all about that, the way that language, I guess, sort of codes our thoughts, codes the world around us, and also codes our identity formation, this idea of, okay, me, not me, right? Having a different word for different things kind of helps differentiate between them, and I guess in a way forms our reality. Which brings me to the third order, which he called the real. Now this would be outside of language. Okay, he would say this. Now Lacan, though, it's kind of struggled with whether there is even such a thing, because he was like, well, okay, well, if you don't have the language to say it, to express it, to code it, then does it for a human being really exist? That's a question he never really managed to answer. But I mean, I think we all have to agree that even if you don't have a word for it, it can still. I mean, there's things that we're still discovering all the time. There's, yeah. But he would say maybe not. So those are the three orders. Jung. Old Jung. Now we talked about him a little bit already, Carl Jung, but some things that we haven't discussed yet, that we haven't mentioned, is the difference. He actually came up with the concepts of extroverts versus introverts, right? Which, I mean, gosh, can you imagine not having heard of those? I mean, most people either label themselves as one or the other, though nowadays they're kind of saying, well, maybe it's, context specific. Maybe you're an extrovert in some situations, introvert in others. But Jung was the one who came up with that idea, and we might come back to that in just a second. The archetypes, we talked about those already. He was really, really into those because he believed that every human being taps into, without realizing it, a collective unconscious. We all have, I guess, some sort of there's a metaphysical realm out there that kind of storehouses all of these archetypes, all of these things that we use to, I guess, make sense of the world. Symbolically, and that's why we recognize them so easily, according to him anyway. The persona. Persona is a Greek word for mask. It's a Greek word for mask. And so Jung came up with this concept of the persona, basically saying that this is the mask that people wear to, I guess, to hide the collective unconscious within them, right? It's an artificial contrivance. It's an identity that people create, but it's a fake one, I guess, in a way. It's how we perceive ourselves. It's how we distinguish ourselves from everyone else and everything else that's kind of part of this collective unconscious. And he believed that a lot of the problems, the anxieties that people experienced psychologically came from the persona, from trying to be someone or something they're really not. Wearing a mask takes effort. He considered it's like not really a person being who they really are. It's who they want others to think they are. And, you can't really ever get rid. I mean, everybody needs a persona. Like, you can't just, be the collective unconscious, right? It doesn't happen that way. You've got to have a persona, but it all kind of boiled down to rectifying the tension between the collective unconscious within and the persona without. And this is what he called individuation. This was the thing that he sort of strived to help a person achieve, that he was, I guess, helping therapeutically. But basically, it's like a psychological integration of both the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, and realizing that both of those exist and bringing them both to the surface, basically. And in doing so, he would say that creates like the full self, the full you, the full picture of who you are. And yeah, he said that can be really, really hard for people to do, to like let go and just tap into that and I guess become self-actualized in who they really are. So if that was confusing, I can understand why it was. But there's another video clip. There was one for the Lacan too. P.S. It's actually got some swear words in it and some adult situations from a movie. So if you're not into that, then skip it. It's like 1 minute long. But this Young video clip, which is this picture of the eye, is actually hyperlinked to it. If you click on that, it gives like a 5-minute rundown of what individuation is, and they explained it much better than I did. But just so you know, if you do watch it, when the guy's talking about mandalas, okay, because Jung was really into these things called mandalas, this is what he's talking about. It's this art basically where you don't really have a plan for it. You just start from the middle and work your way out and just add more and more and more. And they're actually kind of fun to do. They're pretty easy. Not beautiful like this one, but little simple ones. Jung said those can be a really good way to tap into your collective unconscious. So, which is interesting because they show up in a lot of different religions and cultures and stuff like that. So maybe he was onto something with that. But anyway, so that's psychoanalytic theory in a nutshell. I hope I didn't confuse you more, and I'll see you guys later.